else as well, but wherever it is, we're about to start again with the next session. And that's going to be session 4, which is iconography and style. And this session is going to be chaired by Agata. So Agata, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Now I'd like to invite a good friend of Symposium Egejskie Conferences, Julie Binberg, who is researching iconography, especially iconography of animals. And she will talk today about naturalism in Aegean bird depictions. Julia, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you also for having me here. As you said, it's my third time already. And I also want to say that so I can only agree with what Stephanie said yesterday about the importance of this symposium for early career researchers. So well done for doing that. Okay, but now over to my presentation. Okay, so animal art of the Aegean Bronze Age has often been praised for its naturalistic quality. In this context, the term naturalism is variously used to designate a high degree of biological accuracy in terms of morphology, habitat, and behavior, or to describe the lifelike rendering of organic forms by diverse stylistic means. And both traits seem to be consistently present in Minoan animal iconography, which is why I will focus here on imagery from Crete and also Thera. Depictions that have been characterized as naturalistic are, for example, the vase paintings of the marine style, images of Agremia on seals, or the cat and bird fresco from Aya Triada. As this latter example shows, birds feature prominently in these images, both in wall paintings and on seals, but also in other media such as jewelry. Naturalistic bird imagery is not exclusive to Minoan art, however, but can also be found in Egyptian iconography. In the past, it was often argued that some Minoan bird images were to a certain degree copied from such Egyptian or Nilotic scenes. These claims were partly refuted by Victor Kenner, who in an article from 1968 noted several differences regarding form and content between the naturalistic birds depicted on Aegean seals and those in Egyptian art, emphasizing in particular the free treatment of bird life in Minoan glyptic. Since a long time has passed since the publication of this article, it seems worthwhile to revisit this theme by comparing and contrasting Minoan bird imagery with the Egyptian evidence, in order to find out what elements are specific to Minoan naturalism. To achieve this, we will first assess the degree of biological accuracy in terms of morphology, habitat, and behavior, and then we will have a look at the stylistic means that are used to achieve a naturalistic effect. So let us start with the first aspect, morphology. In Egypt, bird imagery is very frequent, and scholars have identified around 125 different scientific species of birds, based on the morphological details that are present in the depictions. For example, a painting from Meidum, dating to the 4th dynasty, shows 3 different species of geese. And here, first, 2 red-fronted geese are depicted next to a bean goose. And as you can see, the plumage is rendered with remarkable accuracy, both in color and patterns. In the same painting, another bean goose is set next to a pair of white-fronted geese, species which are distinguished only by tiny plumage details, as you can see from the photographs. In fact, due to this attention to detail, Egyptian bird depictions often resemble the illustrations in modern ornithological field guides, as for example, this image of a black-headed plover. In my known wall paintings, which permit large-scale depictions rendered in color, different bird species are also characterized by their varying plumage patterns. A good example is presented by the partridges in the fresco from the Caravanserai at Knossos. As you can see from the photographs, there is a high degree of correspondence in both silhouette and plumage patterns. The body is shown in a brownish color with a striped flank, and the neck and head are characterized by a black marking and a pink beak. Another example is a duck from the reed fresco from Xester 3 at Akraterion Thera. Here, the brown frontal part of the plumage in combination with the white collar and dark head, as well as the curled feather above the tail, easily permit the identification as a male mallard. In this fresco, variations in plumage patterns even allow the identification of males and females. Except for the whitish underparts of the wings, female mallards, here on the right, are characterized by a predominantly brown plumage. In the same wall painting, we also find the depiction of a juvenile male mallard, which is identifiable by the red breast, the pale color, and the yellow neck and head. Despite the presence of such features by which species, sex, and age can be differentiated, my known depictions do not reach the same level of morphological accuracy as Egyptian images of birds. Overall, they appear much less precise. Thus, the drake's head, which is green in reality, is shown the same color as the dark neck, and all the duck's beaks are painted red instead of yellow. Consequently, many images only allow a more generic classification, such as goose instead of a particular species. And only about 30 different bird species have been identified in the whole corpus of Aegean iconography. Moving on to the habitat of the birds. There are basically two types shown in Egyptian imagery. On the one hand, these are man-made environments, such as farmyards, where captive and domesticated birds, which are identifiable by their mottled plumage, are being fed with grain, or houses shops where the birds are killed, plucked, and prepared as offerings or for direct consumption. On the other hand, birds are shown in the wild, but these are also closely tied to human activities such as bird hunting, as for example with clap nets, as you can see here on the screen. In such depictions, the hunt is often shown taking place within the natural locales where the birds can reliably be found. Thus, quails, here on the left, are being netted in a mown grain field, and waterfowl, here on the right, is being hunted in a papyrus thicket. In this context, the hunting in the marshes is an important iconographical topos which shows a member of the elite in a lush landscape with fish and water, the variety of birds fluttering next to a papyrus thicket. Interestingly, it is not only waterfowl that are shown in such wetland environments, but there are also other species such as hoopoes and owls, which in reality live in wooded areas or orchards. Moreover, all these birds are depicted nesting in the marshes. This may be true for water birds and waders, but not for hoopoes and owls, which build their nests in hollow tree trunks. Without exception, these nests with eggs and young birds are dangerously perched upon papyrus flowers, which seems hardly realistic. The birds themselves are not moving between the papyrus stalks, but are shown above, next to or in front of the plants, which also appear disproportionately small. It seems then that these images were influenced by several ideological considerations which prompted the artists to deviate from a more naturalistic portrayal of the birds within their habitat, such as the desire to depict the killing of a great variety of different bird species by the successful hunter. By contrast, the great majority of my known images show the birds in a natural environment which is devoid of humans. The partridges in the fresco from the Caravanserai, for example, are moving between and behind undulating rocks and grass-like plants, elements which rather accurately represent the habitat of this species, which consists of a rocky environment with low vegetation. The mallards from a cratere are truthfully depicted moving within a dense reed bed. Equally, in seal imagery and jewelry, waterbirds are also frequently associated with wetland plants such as reeds and papyrus or with water lines. In contrast to the Egyptian images, there are only 2 Minoan depictions which may refer to the practice of bird hunting because doves seem to be caught in nets. Thus, the Minoan depictions seem to more directly reflect an observation of birds in the wild. And in contrast to the plumage patterns, the correct details were also important in this context. Thus, in the reed fresco, dragonflies and not butterflies, as in the Egyptian painting, are seen hovering about, which of course fits the wetland environment. Turning next to the behavior, it has been found by Egyptologists that in Egyptian images, birds are engaged in all kinds of activities and poses, such as standing, perching, or swimming. It is notable, however, that the poses of multiple birds in the same scene often appear identical, even if these represent different species. Farmyard birds are often depicted walking and feeding or grooming their feathers, activities that can typically be observed in captive flocks. As it is to be expected, wild birds in hunting scenes are depicted flying in different directions as they are startled by the hunters and trying to flee. Occasionally, more specific actions are accurately portrayed in the context of these scenes, such as a kingfisher hunting and hovering and diving down while on the hunt, or the fish-eating habits of a heron. Intraspecies aggression is depicted both within flocks of farmyard birds and among wild ones, as these 2 black kites, who seem to be threatening towards one another in a fight over a heap of fish, suggests an identification made recently by Linda Evans. As we've seen, adult birds are often shown together with nests containing eggs and young birds in swamp scenes where they are targeted by human and also animal hunters. Consequently, the birds are depicted in a state of distress while trying to defend themselves and their offspring by attacking the predators and sheltering the nests with their wings. While the mobbing of predators can indeed be observed in the wild, the rather curious pose of the birds sitting on their nests with their wings thrust forward is only rarely encountered in nature and only for some species of water birds. And its frequency in these scenes thus seems to be dependent on the ideological significance of these paintings, possibly referring to the protective symbolism that is linked to birds' wings in Egyptian belief. In the Minoan depictions, there is also quite a broad range of behavioral patterns discernible. As in Egypt, birds adopt a variety of poses such as standing, perching, sleeping, and swimming, as you can see here. Other birds are shown walking, preening, or very often flying. It stands out, however, that these poses and actions are carefully differentiated according to species, unlike in many Egyptian images. For example, the special hawk-sitting pose of crane seems to be depicted on a seal, while owls and ravens or crows are shown perching with their feet prominently displayed. The same can be said for the sleeping pose, which is truthfully varied according to the habits of the respective bird species. So you can see here a duck versus a swan. And also for birds that are shown in the air. Here, the swift flying of a dove is visibly different from the gliding flight of a crane. The attention to detail is apparent in the depiction of a broad-winged crow, here on the right, which is realistically depicted with its legs thrust forward when landing on a perch. In addition to these basic poses, more specific actions are also shown. Thus, we find references to foraging and feeding. A water bird, a pelican maybe, has caught a fish in its beak, and swallows are shown catching dragonflies. A pair of barn swallows in the spring fresco is shown with clenched claws and open bills as if fighting. The reproductive cycle of birds is also given attention. Some seals may show the mating of water birds, and another representation shows a swallow with a ring of drops in its beak, possibly depicting the collection of mud which is used for their nests. Taking care of nestlings is truthfully portrayed in a fresco from Akrotiri, where one swallow feeds the hungry nestlings while another one is busy bringing in more food. Young birds that have left the nest, called fledglings, are also shown. A recently discovered fresco from Knossos depicts two swallows, one of which is sitting and has shorter tail streamers than the flying one. In barn swallows, this is a typical sign for a juvenile bird, and in the wall painting, the young bird seems to be waiting to be fed by its parents. Finally, birds are depicted as prey. Most often, they are targeted by cats. These scenes display great variations regarding the details and the poses of the protagonists, enabling the identification of different phases such as stalking, chasing, physically attacking, and fleeing. In a unique case, here on the right, a water bird seems to be attacking a flying bird, possibly defending its young from a predator, maybe a crow. In sum, the broad behavioral range in my known depictions seems to be a rather accurate reflection of bird life in nature, whereas the behavior shown in Egyptian depictions is in many cases directly dependent on human concerns such as keeping or hunting birds. In addition to assessing the presence or absence of biological accuracy in bird imagery, we should also look at the artistic means that are used to achieve a more or less naturalistic effect. The strict formal rules of Egyptian art often hindered the use of free-flowing contours, leading to a rather static visual language. Thus, the outstretched wings of a bird in flight are often simply attached to the back and belly of the bird, which is seen in profile, a convention which results in a rather angular silhouette. In my known imagery, the wings are organically linked to the body, which can be depicted from the side, from below, or in a three-quarter view, depending on the action that is shown. Moreover, curving and undulating lines are often used in the rendering of the bird's contours to suggest swift movement, especially in flying birds. The overall frequency of flying poses in my known art also seems to be influenced by the intention to suggest movement. And even if birds are depicted on the ground, they are often shown fluttering their wings, a behavior that is commonly observable in ducks, geese, and swans, and implies a quick momentary action. So the feathers are briefly shaken out. Other birds are shown with their head turned back, either preening or just looking around, resulting in a dynamic image of movement and counter-movement. Significantly, the reverted head can also be observed in birds that are already on the move, as in walking cranes or water birds. And the reed fresco from Akrotiri seems to present a hitherto unique case in which a flying duck is shown with its head reverted, a pose which for obvious reasons does not occur in nature. Dynamic motion is also suggested by the visual structure and composition of multi-figured scenes. Here, there is often positional variation between the individual birds. Thus, birds with raised wings alternate with birds that have closed wings. In other scenes, some birds are depicted with the head turned back so that the individual birds are looking in different directions. These variations create a sense of movement and give the impression of a lively flock of birds that interact with one another, an important trait which distinguishes my known bird depictions from many Egyptian images. Other images are more explicitly influenced by the artistic preference of dynamic compositions. In the spring fresco, for example, the contours of the fighting swallows form a semicircle, while on seals, birds are integrated into rotational or whirling compositions, where the S-shaped necks of herons and waterbirds are reminiscent of the quintessentially abstract symbol of motion, the spiral. It is within this context, I believe, that the relative imprecision observable in the rendering of the bird's plumage patterns becomes understandable. Whereas the Egyptian tradition of meticulously showing this kind of detail rather distracts the eye from the bird's movement, the impressionistic rendering of the bird's plumage patterns and colors in many Minoan images actually supports the expression of dynamic motion. Significantly, this concern with movement even prompted some artists to alter the bird's anatomy. The swallows from Akrotiri, for example, have loops at the end of the tail streamers, which are not present in real swallows, as you can see. They are imaginary. And yet they have an important artistic function because they act as visual counterpoints to the bird's frontal parts and effectively emphasize the tails, whose movement mirrors that of the bodies. To conclude, both Egyptians and Minoans were apparently attentive to the life of birds and often depicted these in images that deserve the label naturalistic. Yet there are important differences between these two types of naturalism. Whereas for the Egyptians, precision in the rendering of the bird's morphology was paramount, it is the species-specific variation of habitat and behavior that caught the Minoan's attention. It seems that these discrepancies also have to do with the ideological significance that was attached to the concept of movement by the respective cultures. While in Egypt, unpredictability and change were often seen as a threat to the cosmic order, for the Minoans, movement seems to have constituted an inherent and perhaps the most important quality of life itself. Birds, with their diverse characters, the variety of naturally dynamic poses, and constantly shifting actions, seem to have provided the perfect opportunity to embody such notions within the overall naturalism of Minoan art. Thank you for your attention.
Julia, thank you very much for this really fascinating talk about the nature, birds, and the life for movement. And I'd like to open the discussion. For the discussion, I would like to ask you to put on your cameras. It would be nice to see your faces, and it is also nice for the recording that we have not like black windows, but people taking part in. And again, you can write questions in the chat. You can raise your virtual or physical hands and just let us know that you'd like to ask questions. If there are no, we are coming to Julia's presentation, which brought us really like back in time to Minan environment and natural settings. Yes, Mikkel, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Julia, thank you very much for your wonderful talk. I thought it was really nice the way you brought out the distinctions between the Minoan and Egyptian naturalism and through their iconography. I had a couple questions or related questions, I think, and I was curious about how some of the discrepancies in the anatomical features might also be a feature of availability of resources and technologies for the coloration, for instance, that I think you mentioned a discrepancy in some of the colors of the birds from the Minoan context. And so I was just curious if you could maybe speak to that. And then in a similar vein, this ideological connections between or differences between the naturalism, if that might be also due to the learning environment that the wall painters are kind of developing within. are the Minoan ones spending more time outside and doing their work out there as opposed to more interior environments? And is that a possibility to explain these differences? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your questions. First of all, well, technology and availability of resources. I think regarding the pigments, there is actually not so much difference in the availability. So, and we also, we not only see the differences in the coloring, but also in the patterns. So as we've seen, the duck, the neck and the head is one color, whereas we should actually have differentiated this. And so I think it is more, it could also have to do with some practical differences. So as you know, in Egypt, we have the practice of mummification. So, and we also have the widespread practice of bird hunting. So I think the Egyptians were more exposed to dead specimens of birds, which of course makes it easier to represent all these tiny differences in the plumage patterns. Whereas in the Minoan world, bird hunting was not as widespread, and we don't have any evidence of mummification. Regarding ideological differences, I think it also has to do a lot with ideological thinking and human-animal interactions. And I think that in Egypt, the notion of order is very important, and it's almost like in the 19th or 18th century when the taxonomists used the plumage patterns to bring order into the multitude of birds and animals. And I think this idea of order is the same with the Egyptians, and I think this also has to do a lot with these differences in plumage patterns. So yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And now Diana has a question on the right hand.
Yes, thank you, Julia, very much for your really interesting talk. I was very intrigued about the differences you showed in the concept of naturalism within Egyptian and Minoan bird depictions. And I think we can also see that in different animals. And it appears, I'm always really worried about using the word naturalism, reading the word naturalism, but it appeared to me really valid to designate both styles as naturalistic. What I wanted to know, in your opinion, does this finding of yours oppose the use of the term naturalistic as an ontological categorization, or should we just pinpoint the cultures and then really define in each case what we mean by it?
Yeah, I would prefer the second option. Regarding the term naturalism, I think it's a good term, and I think we should continue using it. And maybe we should be more specific about distinguishing it from the term realism, because realism, I think, is not the best term in this context. First of all, because in art history, realism is actually connected to a much later period, so, you know, the Renaissance, when we have the aim to imitate reality as perfect as possible by specific artistic means such as central perspective, shading, etc. And we don't have this in the Bronze Age yet. And so also, I think the term realism leads us to have maybe false expectations. So we focus more on what is lacking instead of what is there. And I think naturalism is more focused on this: what is there, what do we have, and so, and also naturalism also covers the depiction of unreal beings such as griffins. We have griffins and they are depicted in a naturalistic way, but they are not realistic. So yeah, I would say naturalism is a good term.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now Steph was the second one.
Thanks, Julia. That was really interesting and fun. That was a fun paper. I wanted to ask you whether you thought that there was any role here for the use of pattern books, because certainly when it comes to Mycenaean frescoes, you can't read more than 2 sentences without the word pattern book jumping. And I was wondering whether this might sort of help account for the way that the Egyptians were capable of producing very detailed and accurate depictions of the plumage, but were absolutely rubbish when it came to depicting the behavior of the birds.
Yeah, I agree. I think pattern books did play a great role in Egyptian art for Egyptian artists, but not so much for Minoans. I mean, we have, of course, in seal imagery, we have similar compositions of birds, but still there are variations in the details. So the variation is really something which is pervasive in Minoan art, and also this emphasis on movement, which we don't have, and which is, yeah, pattern books is not so compatible with pattern books. Yeah, you're right. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that the concentration on movement is a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
Esther?
Thanks. So thanks, Julia, for this very detailed and thought-provoking paper. Really enjoyed it a lot. This is just more of a comment than a question, because in both linear A and linear B, there is also a sign which is taken as the representation of a bird, although it's not very pictorial, it's more like stylized. This is sign 81, and it shows like a flying bird. So you see basically the 2 lateral wings and a stroke in the middle. And sometimes you can see it more like embellished with also like the bottom, like the bottom part of the bird. So I don't know if, just because I like to challenge these traditional boundaries, so I'm trying to remove these divide between material culture production, iconography, and script in my own work. So I thought maybe you may, I don't know, I thought maybe you may have views, or I'm also happy to share the screen and show you the images, some of the images. Maybe you can identify the species more clearly. Just your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. I haven't looked so much at the scripts, to be honest, but I will do this again. So yeah.
No, I don't know. Are you happy for me to share the screen for you to have a look at?
Welcome.
Thanks. So I've got them here.
Yes.
So it's from my database, and you see, for instance, these are the stations from Zakros. They are quite realistic, as it were. So you see the wings, and then there is the bottom part of the bird, and then the part. So the other ones are more schematic if you look at individual sites. But I don't know. I just thought I would mention it for your personal interest.
Yes, yeah, it's very interesting, and I think we could do some comparisons, especially with seal imagery, where we also have a lot of flying birds with the outspread wings, which actually look quite a lot like these signs. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Okay, I don't see more questions popping out. I see congratulations from Anastasia Vergaki to Raquel and Esther, and a comment. I will read it. You will find more data as your research proceeds. If not, your theory will remain a working hypothesis, which is quite interesting, by the way, waiting to be proved. Yes, of course. And if it's all, I'd like to announce a coffee break, just a break, and we will meet again at 4:22, please. thank you very, very much for taking part in this slot. And yeah, over you, Steph.
I was just going to say that because of the discussion session has run over a little bit, and because of the changes to the next session, we could probably give people a 20-minute coffee break.
Okay.
Instead. So if we meet back here at, what would it be, at 10:02 instead. So that gives everybody, time to round up enough coffee and everything.
Okay, so see you 10 to 4 then. See you, bye.